the reason why you do things with money is because you either observed your parents doing something or you observed your friends' parents doing something. And throughout your life, you have had observances where you saw other people do things with money, or maybe even yourself as you were working with money, making good decisions that are positive and even bad decisions that have now triggered you to think that you're not good with money. And the reality is that we all make bad decisions with money. We all make good decisions with money. So let's focus on the good.
Taking a minute to be myself, don't need no help. We keep on rising.
Welcome back to Unlocking Commerce and Business. I am your hostess, Connie Davis, founder of Maiden Explorations, as you guys know. And this is Unlocking Commerce and Business, meaning we are always looking at where the roadblocks to the flow of value, the exchange of value in the home, in our communities, and in business happens and actually gets locked up. So, all of the various episodes that we have had, we have been exploring this topic from different angles, talking about some things that are not so easy to talk about, talking about where value gets blocked and barricaded from flowing the way that we all desire it to move. And, today we're going to have that conversation a little bit more today with someone that literally went from buying groceries with food stamps to earning a six-figure passive income and supporting clients with the heart of where I think that you guys will see the same man, the same family, the same commitment, but something changed inside of my guest today. And he figured out something that most of us were never really taught. And we're going to talk a lot today about your home being your first economy. So I really want to just have you kind of think about today, what does that mean? Your home being your first economy, and how do we set the foundation? And today's guest has been in this work for more than 25 years. He has read dozens of books on personal finance and built a business out of this, not counting his own home. But we're going to have a different conversation today because I really want to invite, and Paris, thank you for being on the show. Paris Cluff is with us today. He really has started at a different place than most of your financial advisors. And we're going to draw out that story a little bit with Paris because you have done some amazing things, I think, with just your family unit, that home
Mhm.
economy, Paris. So welcome to the show. And I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you, Connie. I love being able to share my passion. One of the big things in today's world is that money is a big deal, and it's the leading cause of stress. Stress is the leading cause of disease and other really negative things potentially. So I really want to help people understand how money works because money doesn't have to be stressful. It doesn't have to be a source of contention. Once we figure it out, once we get past the money, we can really focus in on those things that will really give us the value that we want and we're looking for in life. So money is important. There's systems that you can put in place. Literacy is important, and I love to share what I know and what I've learned over the years with folks and helping them really achieve what they're looking for. So thanks for having me on, Connie. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. And I'm really excited to bring the conversation that we're going to have today with your guidance into the community. And especially with, most of the folks that are listening today are likely going to be from the nonprofit space, working with some of those really difficult, to restore. And they've got tremendous resiliency. And I know that you've been in some of those spaces, Paris, and maybe
Hmm.
you can talk about it. I know you've been, married for 29 years. You've got five beautiful kids, and you've got through this whole financial principle that you teach and that you live by. But maybe you can start off with a little bit of your story of why this is such a different conversation today versus the traditional kind of finance manager, financial planner conversation that folks might already be having.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started in 2001. I got licensed as a federal financial advisor and state licensed and federal licenses and all the fancy licenses to be able to offer investment to. I was an investment advisor representative as well for one of the biggest firms in the country. A lot of people might know the Pyramid Building in San Francisco, the big pyramid, Transamerica Pyramid. I worked for that company, so um, I kind of fell into it, interestingly enough. I was working in a corporate job, and I was just qualified for the 401k. And back in those days, I barely knew how to spell 401k. I mean, all I knew about money was that it was green, and I wanted more of it. And I was newly married. I had my first kid on the way, and I was just excited. And so 401k investment to me was something that was pretty important. It wasn't something I just wanted to take and just kind of do just randomly. So to me, it was like, who do I marry? What house do I buy? Like, it was a big decision. Like, this is my retirement. So I asked a couple of coworkers, and they're like, "Well, we just threw darts and flipped coins and other things. Put it all in the company stock," was another answer. And I thought, I need to get a better answer. So I went to the library or to the bookstore and started buying books on finance and just reading and reading and reading. I was voracious about my reading. And so I finally felt comfortable about what to do for my own 401k. And about that time, a coworker turns to me and says, "Paris, I just qualified for the 401k." She was a little older than I was. And so I thought, well, okay, cool. She says, "Can you help me know what to do and how to invest properly?" I was like, well, I was confused because she was older. I thought she was more experienced. I thought, surely you know what to do. But she asked me, and I shared with her what I had learned. And she said something that changed my life. She said, "Paris, you're really, I finally understand what to do. You explained this so easy, so simply. I know what to do now. You should do this for a living." And I was like, well, maybe I should. And so I kind of started off, that's how I kind of started off in the industry. I just learned, I got involved with a financial services company, got my licenses, built a business, was making some really good money as a traditional financial advisor. And then the 2008 economy hit.
Yeah.
And I lost everything. I could write a country music song about that time of my life, right? As they say, the country. I it was hard. It was really hard. I was somebody that was always responsible, always had money, always had a good income, always felt like the optimist, everything's gonna be great. The world is gonna be great. I'm always gonna earn. And I realized in 2008 that that's not true. That's not the case, and that we should be prepared and better prepared for those times in life when things are gonna really hit us hard. And a lot of entrepreneurs felt that again in 2020, if you know what I mean, through the global pandemic. They felt that crunch again. And so I realized I had built a business so that when 2020 hit for me, it didn't feel good, but it didn't have the same result. I was able to get through it without any problem because I had a business that was recession proof and pandemic proof, and it was passive. So um, shortly after that, I built, during that 2008 downturn when I lost everything, I did have to apply for I lived in California, so I had to apply for Medi-Cal and Medicaid, which is Medicaid in most every other state of the country. I did have to apply for food stamps, and I think the next two kids were born with Medi-Cal. So it was a rough time. It was about 6 or so years, maybe 5 years before things really started to turn the corner for me. And then I built, because in 2009, I diversified my business into a different side of my business, and that really started to grow really well. Um, and it was one of those experiences where I would never wish it upon my anybody, but it was so powerful and so just it just hit me like the lessons that I learned during that period of my life have stayed with me even to today. And unfortunately, even I'll be honest and vulnerable, some of the trauma of that, losing everything and being the father and the provider, having 3 or 4 kids and not knowing what to do. And so it was hard. And I'll just say that I thankfully I'm a believer, and so I spent a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time with God, and said, "Hey, help me get through this, and I promise I'll build it better and build it differently." And that's kind of how I changed, and my whole situation was from that major defining moment, I call it, in my life.
Right. Yeah, just under pressure and feeling that restriction and the scarcity. And that's a very scary time, too, in any
Hmm.
family's life where stability is threatened. Right. And then you said you were bringing new ones and new littles into the world and,
Hmm.
trying to establish that solid foundation. I think that's going to really gravitate with a lot of the listeners on this show because we spend a lot of time talking about the cage that the traditional budget looks like. And when you have a new business or you're maybe in a nonprofit world or uncertainty like the economy happens when there's macro things happening in the world around us. Those are very unpredictable, precedented times. We probably heard that word, I don't know, 100 times during the
Hmm.
COVID 2020 timeline. But I think that it's so important to really pull back to this home base. And can you talk to us a little bit about the ways that you talk about money for families that doesn't make it feel like punishment or a cage or a restriction. What is
Hmm.
different in your approach and style, Paris? And how do you help them really get past that resistance that comes from within when those money wounds hit?
Well, I believe that the reason why you do things with money is because either observed your parents doing something, or you observed your friends' parents doing something, and and throughout your life you have had observances where you saw other people do things with money, or maybe even yourself as you were working with money, making good decisions that are positive and even bad decisions that have now triggered you to think that you're not good with money. And the reality is that we all make bad decisions with money. We all make good decisions with money. So let's focus on the good. I see a lot of influencers out there in the marketplace that kind of have a little shame and blame that I don't like. I don't like that. If you don't know what you don't know, how can you be held responsible for that? Now, you do need to figure out what you don't know, and you do need to take some responsibility in learning the things that you don't know, and take a little bit of yeah, maybe take a bite of humble pie a little bit and ask for help for somebody like myself, who's a financial coach. I'm not a traditional advisor. A traditional advisor will bring you in and kind of say, okay, this is what we have to offer you in terms of investment strategies and things of that nature. Where a financial coach is going to help you with your habits, behaviors, and beliefs. They're going to help you with your everyday dollars. They're going to help you with your cash flow statement, build understanding your income and your expenses. They're going to help you with the education on how to get out of debt more quickly, how to do saving strategies more efficiently, how to build a balance sheet, which is your assets and your liabilities, how to really understand getting out of debt, how to protect against risk. That's a huge issue in the world today, is protecting against risk. Another thing is how now that I've gotten a good foundation, how a lot of people want to go roll the dice and invest and get the best rate of return before they've really built a strong foundation of understanding their cash flow or understanding how to get out of debt or having a strong safety net of savings and emergency funds. And we're going to talk about that more. I think one of the big things was a lesson that I learned in real life. So this is actually I have a free gift for those that want to that are interested in, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. I think, but I wrote an ebook, and in the ebook I share my story, and this story is pretty powerful, and I'll briefly go over it so I don't ruin it. But there was a moment in my life when I had lost my wedding ring and I wanted to buy a new one. So I found one that I loved and I found how much it was. And I thought, I'm in sales. I know exactly how much sales I need to make to be able to pay the bills. And now I need to make a couple other sales to be able to invest to buy this ring that I wanted to get. Well, at the end of the month, I set my goal, I created a plan, I hit the plan, and I made the numbers. I knew I had the money. I made the money anyways. So at the end of the month, I'm doing the bills and the money isn't there. And
Mm.
I'm like, I know I hit the goals. I got paid the commission. I know I did it. Where did the money go? And I asked my wife, I said, hey, babe, is there anything that came up, any expenses that came up this month that we didn't know about? And this is something that she said. She said, no, I just spent, a few things here and there, 10 or $20 here and there. And I thought, oh my gosh, let me check out these here and there's. And I added up, I went back over that month and I looked up all the $10, $20, just little, buy something here, buy something there, get some for the kids, get a little treat for the whatever. It's just dumb stuff that we do every day. That's a couple of dollars. Those couple of dollars every day at that month added up to almost $900.
Mm.
And I was like, there's that one, my wedding ring. So that to me was there's a moment right then that I had. I could either be angry with my wife who had spent money here and there and it was a little bit of a leak. And I realized I had spent money here and there too. Like I had done it too. I wasn't the only one. So I said, look, either we have an argument or we get clear on the facts and we say, let's create a goal. Let's create a plan together. So there's no shame, no blame, but let's just move forward get on the same page so that we don't do this again. And I thought if I, as a financial coach, financial advisor, somebody who's in the industry, can have those kinds of money leaks in my budget, in my cash flow, what in the world's happening with the rest of the world? And so the one of the differences that I find is that when you do practices like that, where you go through and say, let's look at what spending has gone on. One of the biggest things I think in marriages, especially in families, is that it's not, I mean, of course, income is critical. Income is important. We need to make an income. But the real arguments aren't if we're making, there might be some arguments about making enough money, but the real arguments are how the money is spent.
Yes.
That's really where the big concerns are. So if you guys, if a couple, husband and wife, or even a couple that's just committed to one another, if they're going to move forward, you have to get on the same page with spending. And there's some really cool strategies that you can use. I don't believe in buy now, pay later. I believe in save now, buy from savings. And so if you can make that switch, there's no shame. Like if you literally have $500 sitting in an account waiting to buy a TV, and you build up the money to buy the TV, and you end up buying the TV, there's no shame in buying that TV. You had the money set aside for it. You had budgeted for it. You had allotted for it. It was saved up. It was there. And so there shouldn't be any shame, blame, or argument about it, because that's if you were all on the same page about it. So those are some things that I do a little bit. I gave you an example of actually what something that could have gone wrong and awry in my marriage and how I dealt with it. And then I shared with you some ideas about moving forward, what you can do, what we can all do. And that's what we do now in my family. We have money every month that comes in, and I set aside a few dollars that she can spend however much on whatever she wants, and I can spend on whatever I want. There's no shame, no blame. There's just, here's your money, go for it. And we have different categories of that for different parts of our life, and so it really makes a huge difference.
I bet it does. And you know what you also talked about diffusing is that whole subject of risk. And on previous shows, we've talked a lot about how different ecosystem stakeholders, right? So in the world of money, you have, the financial institutions that look at us as risk or no risk. You've got, us looking at the world as what's risky and what's not, and our risk tolerance for investing. And then we have it on how much we're going to spend. And there's that constriction that comes from, I don't have enough cash flow as it is. So I love the teamwork that you just alluded to of we want to go into a specific direction. We're saving for a thing that we want to do or an experience. And you're doing it with paying and buying with what you have versus
Hmm.
debt based, which I think is very responsible for a family to really make decisions together on how they're going to lead through that process of setting goals and then reaching those goals so you can have celebrations on the things that you acquire.
Yep.
So I think that
Connie,
was a
can I share one more thing before we move on?
really
Because I'm sure there's a listener saying right now, Paris, that's great between spouses, but what in the world do we do with our kids?
hmm
And so this is, you can do whatever you'd like to do. And I think there's a lot of great things to do for kids, but this is one thing that I do for kids, my kids, a couple things actually. One is, I give them assignments throughout the week, and if they do their chores, they have their good grades, then I give them an allowance. Now, there's some different strategies about how to do that with kids, and there's another guy that I recently met, and he actually has a job that he kind of like a job board that he posts, and each job is worth a certain dollar amount. So if the kid wants money, they got to do the job to get the dollar amount. So that's another cool way to do it. But when you're in the store and you have your kid with you and they're little and they're like, Dad, can I buy this? Mom, can I buy this? Right? What do you do? What in the world do you do? Because you want to buy your kid everything. A couple things that I do with my kids. One, I told them, I said, listen, even if we could buy everything in this store, let's say we had all the money in the world, we could buy everything in the store. Where would you put it? What would you do with it?
right.
And they're like, Dad, that's too much stuff. I said, I know. So we don't need to buy everything, right? Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. So they kind of get it. It's a little bit longer conversation than that, but it's kind of explaining to them that, hey, we don't really need to buy everything because we should just buy the things that bring us the most value. And we don't need to buy things on the shiny moment syndrome either. So what I do with my kids, and I think this was really before the wish list was really super popular. But what I did was I kind of created a wish list for my kids. I said, okay, I would take a picture of it or I would write it down and I'd say, okay, the next time we come to the store, if you still want it, then we'll talk about it and we'll see what we can do. Or, hey, this is how much it is. These are how many chores you need to do to be able to save up enough money to get it. And then we can come back to the store and we can get it for sure, especially if you have your own money to spend for it. So it gives them an incentive to say, well, okay, why am I doing chores? Well, hey, and then you can tell them, make your bed. I don't want to make my bed. Well, you know what? You remember that thing you wanted at the store? If you make your bed, that's going to give you some money that you can then use to be able to buy that thing. Oh yeah, that's right. I want to buy that thing at the store. So there's a little bit of motivation there, but I just said, hey, make a list of the things, and I do this for myself too. When I'm at the store, Amazon, or especially Amazon, you really need to use Amazon wish lists for sure, please, because this is going to save you hundreds of dollars. But even if you go to the grocery store, department store, any store, just really look and see something and say, you know what? Is this a shiny moment object purchase, or is this something that I really need that will bring value to my family? And if you think about it, and I would give myself, usually I give myself at least a couple, a day or two, sometimes even longer. Like the next trip I make to the store, I don't buy it the first trip. I'll think about it, put it on my list, and then the next trip I make to that store, if I still want it, if it's still on my list, or if I haven't found something else I would rather have, I just cross that off. And I do that with my kids, and it's worked wonders for my kids. And they know, and they now have a real life scenario where they've learned delayed gratification does and can pay off. So that's something that I do for the kids.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I feel like the kids' piece for parenting, money has become so invisible. So, what you've just kind of displayed is let's keep that money in front of them from a decision making perspective with the tactile things that they're wanting to touch and see and take home with them. Because
Hmm.
kids are all about that in the moment presence. But
Hmm.
I think those were some really great tips to kind of give parents that are might be struggling with that. Well, should I just give them a debit card? Because I taught school a couple of years ago. I went in for the Great American Teach-In, and interestingly enough, those 8 and 9-year-olds told me that they thought money came off of a debit card. They
Oh,
didn't
wow.
really have a concept of cash. They didn't really have the concept of, taking it out of a purse or a wallet or a little coin purse and handing it over. It's
Hmm.
on my mom or dad's debit card and they just tap their
Wow.
card. So
Yep.
it just speaks to the evolution of this concept of money and the consciousness that we have as kids, for that immediate gratification that you just spoke to. So thank
Hmm.
you for that. I think that was a great example. Hopefully some of the listeners are going to be able to take a couple of those tips back and put those into practice. So let's kind of go into an area of mainstream personal finance, Paris, that we probably don't always explore, and that's the role of the father. So you
Hmm.
are very passionate about, your family, this foundation that you're setting. You've been in this you have this beautiful way of kind of talking about the role of the father in setting this leadership in the home. Can you take us through that a little bit more of what is that? What's the best practices there? What are some things that really set that family up for success?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Because I believe that as men, especially, masculinity has gotten a bad rap in the news recently. But I think that somebody who truly understands positive, good, strong masculinity is going to understand that there's three, I call them the three P's of
Mhm.
masculinity or fatherhood, and it's to preside, provide, and protect. And I have a different approach to some of those. And I clearly, there's some obvious things in protect and provide and preside that seems pretty obvious. So we're going to speak to those, but I also want to kind of get into a few things that may not be as obvious. To preside over somebody or something is to be a president, and comes from the same etymology. We talked a little about that before the show. The etymology of preside comes from the same root as president, or to lead. And leadership isn't to be a good leader, a benevolent leader is what I call them, is somebody who brings in everybody and gets a vote. That's why our country has done so well in America, anyways. Now, there's a few things that have happened over the years, and I think some of the founding fathers might be rolling over in their grave about what we're doing today. But originally, we were supposed to have this representative government, and that's kind of how I think a family ought to work. Is you have the president, which is the father, the vice president, which is the mother, or in analogies. And this is always not all families can do this, but in the ideal situation, because I do have a lot of respect for single parents that are out there fighting the good fight. I want you to know that I see you, and I fight for you, and I pray for you, and I just think you're doing a great job out there if you're doing it. So, but in the ideal situation, you have a father that's presiding. And what does a president do? In reality, a president just makes sure that everything that's supposed to get done gets done the way it's supposed to get done. And that doesn't mean the president does it all. The president often delegates and says, you know what needs to happen this week? Well, we need to have so and so has an eye doctor, so and so has soccer practice, so and so has band practice. Just make sure everybody gets where they need to go, whether you take them or whether your wife takes them or your spouse takes them. Whatever happens, just make sure it happens the way it's supposed to happen. I think too many men don't have a clue what's happening with their family. Like there's an old thing, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? I think there's an old commercial that had that. And so I know where my kids are. I know what's happening. I don't have the, my wife has the Find My on her phone. I have a, anyways, it's kind of, so she actually knows where they are. Like she can look and see, but I don't do that, but I know where they are, generally speaking. We actually have a family calendar. So everybody's appointments are on the family calendar. We have a family meeting every night where we talk about, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? We have, uh, regularly we have weekly meetings where we're talking about, hey, what's going on this week that you need help with. I know we check our children's grades. We just are on top. I know every month or so I'll grab my daughter who's 13 and all my kids who are 8 9. I have 5 kids, but 4 of them are all 19 or older, and so they're adults and they can do what they want. But my 13-year-old, every once in a while, every quarter or so, I'll grab her phone and say, hey, I'm going to check your phone in the next couple of days. So make sure there's nothing on there that you would be embarrassed to me seeing. And so I'm very proactive, or maybe, but I also believe in a saying that I learned a long time ago. I teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves. And so I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. And so I spend time on a regular basis teaching my kids correct principles. These are the truths that our family believes. We're Christians. We believe in God. We believe in the Bible. We believe in the scriptures. We believe in Jesus. We believe in these things. And so these are the values that our family has. Now, if you want to we love everybody, but these are the values that we personally take on. And this is how our family was raised. And this is how you're going to be raised. And if you want to deviate from that, that's fine, but you have to wait till you're 18, you know? So presiding is taking charge of, I'm sorry, I went probably way too long on presiding, but it's important to preside and be a leader in the family. And the other one is to provide. And that's super simple, seems like, just making sure that you have enough money or you have enough food in the table, in the refrigerator. But providing is more than just that. Providing to me is also, I provide an environment where my children can grow and be nourished and to be developed. I provide an environment where my wife feels comfortable to be the nurturer and to be the comforter, to be the embracer in those areas. I'm the justice, she's the mercy a lot of times, right? I provide an environment where they can be spiritual, they can grow spiritually, where they can be emotionally resilient, where they can be physically resilient. So it's not just about money. It's about all the other areas, because there's so many other areas and aspects of life. Another part is to protect. Now, a lot of people think well, I got a gun, or I got I got muscles. I know karate, or whatever, you know what I mean? That is true. That is protect. But what if you lost your job, dad, mom? Did you protect your family with an emergency fund? What if you pass away before you were planning to? Did you protect your family with life insurance? What if somebody has a health concern? Do you have health insurance? Are you protecting your family with legal insurance? Do you have all the different types of insurance that are out there? Do you have a good, strong retirement account so that you're protecting your children in the future, so they don't have to pay for you to be in a home or some other thing? So protecting is not just muscles and weapons. It's also protecting them against even the spiritual warfare that's out there, and protecting them against the ideologies of the world that are in contrast to the values that you want to provide for your family. So there's a lot that goes into those 3 things. And I actually just been impressed to write my whole thoughts down on each 3 of them and create like a new book. So I'm working on that right now as well. But that's kind of my idea around leadership and really presiding, providing, and protecting.
Yeah, and that's so intentional because I think that what it brings is it brings it home to that home economy where you've got, different forms of capital and assets all working in the same place with roles that really kind of set the stage for what the children are going to see when they exit the home and they're out on their own. They're going to be exposed to that CEO and the different delegations that are going to happen at their jobs and the deployment of resources when they're, at a place for employment or they're in a school. So they're watching all of that anyway, and how they're going to see those moments of their parents or parent really navigating, peaks and valleys that happen as part of life. That's going to help them learn fear or faith or, diligence around how they're going to handle their resources, including money.
Yeah,
So,
there's an old saying that you shouldn't tell your kids about your money. And I believe to an extent that might be, you just need to be careful. Because sometimes if you show your kids how much money you have, they might say, well, then dad, you can't afford that thing that was, but I tell my kids about this is how much we make. This is how much it costs to pay the mortgage. This is how much it costs to fill the fridge. This is how much it costs to have that car that you are driving, So I
Mhm.
talk to them about the reality of these things. And as soon as possible, 13, usually most credit unions and banks will let them have a checking account. I give them a checking account and say, okay, you get this much money to work with every month. So I don't want to give them too much or too little, but enough that they can kind of start managing money at a small level. And then, I've had all of my kids have come back to me after 18. Now that a couple of them are married, and they've all said, "Dad, we really appreciate the fact that you took time to kind of talk to us and teach us how money really works and how to manage our money because we see what our friends are doing and they're in trouble, a lot of them, and they're in debt and they're spending more than they should. And we know a lot more. We now realize how much you really taught us and what an advantage you gave us by teaching us about money while we were in your home. And so I think it's important to teach your kids what's going on and what's really happening, and teach them those principles of delayed gratification. But you've got to learn those yourself.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really kind of becomes the architecture for what they're gonna use later in life because in a lot of the times in this audience, some of the individuals that, listen from the community are people that are one emergency away from losing everything that they've built, and you've been there, you kind of, seen that. It could be a
Hmm.
medical bill, we could see a job loss, we talked about that. Just one place where they could be completely wiped out. But let's talk about that piece where your children have seen that in their peers. Where does someone start like that if they are in that kind of sea of debt and they really truly want to start emergency fund first? We heard you talk about that. Is
Hmm.
it debt first or is it emergency fund? Is it a little bit of both? What's your kind of vision on that? Like what guidance would you give?
Personally, I believe that you should have a savings plan, and I have a seven-step process, and each step builds on the next step. The first step is your mindset, your belief systems. The second step is understanding your cash flow, income, and expenses. The third step, you might say, well, let's get out of debt. No, the third step for me is saving strategies, learning how to proactively save against the future. And so, building a strong emergency fund is critical. I'll share with you an example. I had a car that I had bought, and I was a few $1,000s away from paying it off, and I was so excited because I was gonna get rid of the monthly payment. I took my savings, all that I took pretty much my whole savings, and I paid off the car. Well, as fate would have it, Murphy and his laws, right?
Right.
My transmission went out, and I ended up having about eh, almost two-thirds of what was left to have to pay to fix the transmission. And so I was so frustrated with myself because if I had just kept the monthly payment, I would have been able to take care of the transmission with my savings and not have to worry about. Anyways, thankfully, the mechanic was a good friend of mine, and not a lot of mechanics do this, but he let me pay him back over time. So I ended up having the same monthly payment, but I just paid it to my mechanic instead of the car company. So I believe you can get out of debt too fast. And that's one example of that. Now, if you have a situation where you have literally last couple 2 weeks ago, my son walks out and his car has a flat tire.
Mhm.
Well, how much does that cost? We called Costco, which was where we normally go to buy our tires, and they said, well, each tire is $200, and depending on how worn down it is, you got to have two, and so it's going to be maybe $400. Well, thankfully, we got some discounts because of the wear and tear on the current tires was good enough that they could exchange it for a lower price, and so we got a deal. But the point is that how many of us tomorrow can walk out like earlier this year? I walked out and the alternator on my car was broke, and I had to call a mobile mechanic to come because it wouldn't even drive.
Wow, the
And so that
driving.
was, so there's to me when those things happen, if you don't have cash saved up for emergencies like that, what are you going to do? You're going to put it right back on the credit card. You're going to go right back into debt. So to me, it's important. Now, there's another guru out there that talks about having $1,000 and then working on getting out of debt. Personally, I don't think $1,000 is enough. What I would say is have 1 month's fixed expenses. That's your first goal. Now, emergency funds, they say, should be 3 to 6 months of your total expenses, which let's just be real with human beings, how we are with habits and behaviors and belief systems. Like if I spend, let's say I have all my bills are $5,000 a month. I'm just using easy math. I know some of you are more than that, some of you are less. But let's just pretend that $5,000 a month is your bills. Now, if you think, wait a minute, I got to have 6 months? That's $30,000. I can barely put two nickels together. Where am I going to get $30,000? And so I say, don't look at the 30,000. Just erase that. That will be a goal eventually. But what we do is baby steps, or I call them, you eat an elephant by one bite at a time. So let's just do 1 month's fixed expenses. Let's get your mortgage saved up. 1 month of mortgage. Let's get 1 month of car payment. Let's get 1 month of your all your cell phone, or your just things that you have to spend every month that are important. Insurance, all those car insurance in certain states, it's required. So I would just say 1 month fixed expenses, and then work on 1 month's variable expenses. Now, when you do that, you're going to say, okay, I have 1 month. Now that you have a month, you can start to build the second month of fixed expenses first, and then variable expenses. Then you build the third month fixed expenses first, then variable expenses. So you take it in chunks, take it just little bite-sized chunks. Now, do you get out of debt at the same time? Yeah, let's develop a strategy, because the fourth step is debt management. So there's some debt that's good, some debt that's bad, some debt that you want to eliminate right away. And the bad debt is usually the one you want to eliminate right away. So I suggest that we find a strategy, snowball, avalanche. I'm sure some of the people listening have heard all these strategies that are out there. There's actually another good one that's not very well known, called the cash flow index, that I use. And there's some other strategies that I have to help people get out of debt faster, depending on the assets and resources that they have available to them. But we can get really creative really quickly. And I can help people get out of debt really fast, depending on the assets and resources they have available to them. But I'm just sharing with you is that you should build an emergency fund, at least 1 month's worth of fixed expenses, before you really start to hammer down on the debt. Now, you got to manage the debt. While you're building your emergency fund, you got to manage the debt, pay your minimum payments, and a little bit more if you can, but really build that emergency fund first. And then once the emergency fund has got at least a month's in there, now we can kind of allocate more money towards debt, and kind of split the difference between debt and building that second month and the third month. And so learning to live within your means is so critical and so important, so powerful. And then the next step is to grow your means. So spend less than you make. Once you're disciplined with that, now let's go make more money.
All right. I think you guys heard it. So, I mean, there's 7 steps, and those are really, really practical things as far as just figuring out where you are. I think taking inventory, sometimes there's going to be resistance into those some of those steps, Paris. So how do people get past that rising within them where they're fighting their own system? So do you have any tips there? Because that resistance is where I think we might fall away from the plan that we had as a team.
Mm.
And then we're at odds with one another because one person wants to go the other. So how do we bring them back to center in that whole preside and protect, and your principles there?
Great question. Thanks for asking it, because I have an answer for it, or at least one answer I would say is that it begins with having this. Stephen Covey says to begin with the end in mind. And I believe in that principle as well. So I would say find a goal that if you're a household and you're all working towards something, have a goal that you're all working towards, and you can kind of use that as the excuse. So let's say, for example, if you have a dollar bill in your hand, and you have 100 places you could put that dollar bill. You could buy groceries, you could buy shoes, you could buy a new TV, you could buy a new car, you could put it in savings, you could put it in investments. Once you make the decision with that dollar, the opportunity cost for the other once you put that $1 bill wherever you're going to put it, the opportunity cost for everything else goes away. Like, that's the opportunity cost. You don't get to put it anywhere else. So if you have a goal, let's say that you have a goal that you want to save $5,000 for a vacation. Well, now your kid is at the grocery store or at the department store and says, "Hey, Dad, I want to buy this." You can say, "Look, that $10 item that you want to buy, we can either buy that item, or I can put the $10 towards the vacation where we can have a better time." "Oh, I want to buy that. I'd rather put it towards the vacation." And they get to decide. So once you have a goal, once you have an overarching goal that's going to keep you motivated, it will help you against those temptations along the way. So that's how I start. What's your destination? What is the destination you want to arrive, so that you're not detoured every other right or left turn on your path towards your destination? Because once you have a destination, you'll be strong enough. For example, I have a lady. I had a gentleman who watched. I used to do some TikToks. I don't do as many TikToks anymore, but I do other places. But he says, Paris, because of your influence, I'm not going to buy a new car that I was looking to buy because I don't necessarily need it just yet. And I thought, good, that worked because I want you to buy a nice car, but save up for it, you know? So it's a lot of those things I think are the ways that you can do that. The first thing is have a goal that everybody's on the same page for. Tell your kids, hey, we're not going to spend money on all these extra things because we have a family goal to go somewhere. Tell your wife or your husband, hey, we're not going to spend money on all these extra things because we have a goal together that you and I are going to accomplish, and we're going to put money towards that. And then constant and regular communication.
Mhm.
Whether it's monthly or weekly, whatever it is, have constant and regular communication so you're staying accountable, you're staying on course, and you're not getting off course. And something that my wife and I, we look at our finances at least every 6 months. We just do we do a little bit of an overhaul, and we say, okay, we kind of got, we get really disciplined, and then over the next 6 months, it kind of loosens up, and then we get disciplined again, and then it kind of loosens up. But I actually said we should probably do this more regularly than 6 months, but that's just something that we do, and we found it works for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always good to have options and choice so that you can have freedom of movement, and I think that that takes that shame and the obligation, and it keeps it more, conducive to where the family's aligned and moving forward. So, and part of that is, I mean, it's just there's the waves of life that happen and the current happens, and sometimes you get swept away with an alternator or something that breaks on the
Mhm.
car. But we have to plan for those types of moments because they do happen, as much as we would like it to be, even and steady. It's
Mhm.
just not part of life. So let's talk a little bit about, I think the last kind of question is really back to those, that kind of current and the waves that are kind of coming through our life. How do we talk about what's really the most important is, we've been talking about the spending plan and the emergency fund and, you know, it's really about how do people do money together? So, where and how, what type of questions and dialogue can a couple or a team managing a household and a home economy really do together? How do they get on the same page and navigate conflicts that come early, different patterns of spending money? Women spend money differently than men do.
Mhm.
Our discretionary, kind of like what we think is important or what we think is a splurge, or maybe things that leak. Um, we hear a lot about people shopping on Amazon late at night. They're in the bathroom, they're ordering things on Amazon, they're bored
Mhm.
on the couch. The way
Mhm.
that we spend money ebbs and flows depending on the role in the household. But the system that we do together that you're alluding to here that we're talking about, how do we avoid that battleground? How do we do money together better?
So the answer to that is very personal for each couple and each family, I think. And there are some overarching principles that I think are important, and I think you can take these principles and apply them to your specific situation. One thing to remember to realize is that my wife grew up in a home. Her dad was a pharmacist. He had good money. Pharmacists make good money. My dad was an entrepreneur, and he made decent money, but there were periods of time when he was out of money and he didn't have it. And so I grew up in a household where we just didn't buy things all the time because we had extra money for it. We just didn't really ever have a ton of extra money, and when we did have extra money, it was catching up on stuff on the times when we didn't. And so we had nice things. We lived in a nice area, and we weren't like, you know, poverty, but we weren't super having everything. And so when I got married to my wife, I was very conservative and I was more strict with my spending because I was more disciplined because I knew that sometimes my dad had a job and everything was great and sometimes he didn't and we needed to shift gears. And so I kind of had that reality of, you know what, I need to do that. And she didn't grow up that way. She grew up with kind of in her family, there was a little bit of, dad shared his love by giving and buying them gifts. And so she grew up with, hey, there's always a bunch of money, and we can just do whatever we need to do and buy it. And so there was a little bit of conflict when we first started because she wanted to buy things for people, and I was like, no, we don't have the money for that yet, or we need to save that money for the rainy days of life, and things of that nature. So I think one of the big things is recognizing, and this is not something that when you're dating I think there's a great book out there. It's like 100 questions to ask somebody before you get married, something like that. And I don't know if any of those questions are about money and finances and how you grew up learning about money, but I think that's an important backdrop. I think that one of the things that you need to realize, there's several. I have a survey that I give the couples that come on with me, and it talks about, their budgeting habits, behaviors, and beliefs. It talks about their attitudes around philanthropy, around giving, around investing, around savings and spending, and all kinds of different things. And so they get to see like how they rank. And so I've actually had it where one spouse was really strong and disciplined in one area, and the other spouse was completely
Oh,
loose with it. And that was a source of contention. But one of the things that I realized was, hey, listen, instead of competing with with each other, let's complete each other, or let's work together. It's not about competition, but it's about working together. And so when you know that your spouse has an area of weakness, it may not be they're trying to ruin your life or ruin the family life. I mean, nobody goes into it and says, you know what, I'm going to bankrupt the family today. So they don't say that, but they grew up with habits. They grew up with a belief system. They grew up with, you know, uh, how they saw money modeled in their family and their friends' families. That has a big deal to do with what they're doing today. And so, if you can communicate and say, okay, listen, when I grew up, this is how we handled money. When you grew up, how did you handle money? And then listen, don't make judgments, don't make blames, just listen and listen to how they grew and say, okay, how would you like to? This is how I would like to do money. How would you like to do money? If you had if you could do all the money for our household just by yourself, how would you do it? And then listen and then share yours and say, okay, let's take the best of both of those and let's create a new one with each other. Let's take your most positive things and my most positive things, and let's work together and complement each other. That way we know, okay, you're kind of struggling with this area of finance. I'm not. I'm struggling with another area of finance that you're not. So why don't we help each other? Why don't you teach me how to be better in that area, and I'll teach you how to be better in this area? And if you approach it like that, I think you'll have a lot better time working together. And especially if you sit down and say, okay, end of the road, begin with the end in mind. What is the end? What is our destination? Retirement, college for the kids. Having enough money to be able to travel the world, or maybe you want to stay home and just spend time with the grandkids. You don't want to be a world traveler when you retire. Whatever it is, you have to have that end in mind, and then say, okay, as we're working through the day-to-day grind, we got to keep that. Every once in a while, you got to look up and see the horizon where you're headed. Make sure you're both headed in the same direction. Because if you are, the chance of you not having an argument is much higher. If you don't do that, you're going to get caught off guard, and you're going to probably have a battleground like you talked about. I hope
yeah.
that answers your question, or at least gives people some direction to move to help answer that question.
It's so refreshing, Paris, to hear that because I feel like sometimes we don't talk about that enough. I think we all know the statistics. We know how, fighting over money is one of the number one causes for divorce and, splitting and, where people just become distant from one another and it creates this toxic battleground for, something that we're trying to do. We're all trying to go in the same direction. We want to have a peaceful life and a home that we can, have peace at after all of the busyness and the chaos in the world outside. We want
Hmm.
that to be our, our kind of home ground where we can come home and feel safe. But if we're battling over money, and then that creates an erosion of the relationship, that's not a great place to be. Not only are you might be already struggling with financial challenges, money wounds from, maybe things that have happened before and or, things that are happening like COVID that completely wipes, the ground under our feet, knocks us off of our feet.
Absolutely.
Um the last thing we want to do is be in a place of discontentment with our partners as we're trying to move through the currents of life. So I think that was a really refreshing piece of just advice. And I hope if you're listening that you picked up on a couple of things that maybe shifts your mindset a little bit. Like money doesn't have to be about battleground. It can be a place of communion and collaboration inside of the economy and the household that's running, as a president or as a vice president or thinking about you're
Hmm.
naturally expecting that out in the workplace, so why not at home with it when it comes to moving resources? So, um, Any last parting thoughts, Paris, as far as like, what are you up to these days? What types of clients are you working with that are really drawn to you? You mentioned your ebook. You mentioned you're working on a new book, so we're excited to hear about that. Anything else that you really want to leave the audience with today?
Well, first, I didn't give you the link for that free book, so I'll give it to you now. pariscluff.com/free gift. So if you go to pariscluff.com/free gift, you'll be able to download my ebook. And then there's an upgrade to a video course that goes along with it, more of workbooks and stuff like that. If you want to do that, it's really a low cost. I think it's $47, something like that. Something it's worth upgrading if you're more visual and audio learner, because I go through everything in the ebook, but more in depth with it. And I think the other thing too that I want to share is that money doesn't have to be a source of stress or a source of contention if you can get on the same page with people. And another thing too is if you can't change people, change people. And I don't want to have I love the institution of marriage. I absolutely love it. I love families. I think it's one of the greatest things that we can do. In fact, it's the building blocks of the nation. If we want to have great nations, we need great states. If we want to have great states, we need great communities. If we want to have great communities, we need great families. And to have great families, we need great couples. And that's a foundation. So I would say, first of all, if you're going to go into a relationship, have some of these hard conversations before you go in so that you know. Once you're in a relationship, if you're having hard times right now, take a deep breath and say, you know what? I want to be humble. I want to just fix this. And talk to the person and say that your spouse and say, hey, would you like to fix this? Would you like to really get on the same page with each other and see if we can come to an agreement where we can be on the same page, at least with the most majority of what we're doing? And if you work with a coach like me, that'd be great. In fact, I had a client recently and he was a businessman, has a six-figure income in his career, and then he has a business on the side that is doing the same great things. And he's like, Paris, I want help with my business and my this and that and the other. And I said, well, my strength is more and I shared with him about how I'm really good at helping couples work together. He's like, oh, my wife and I, if my wife, if something happened to me, my wife would have no idea how to pay the bills that I pay. And if something happened to her, I would have no idea how to pay the bills that she pays. So if do you work with spouses where you help them get on the same page, so we're focused and we're together on everything? And I said, that's my favorite. I work with individuals, I work with single people, but my favorite is married couples who have a family and have a home and who just really want to. My favorite person is somebody who's making a good money, who says this, I'm finally making good money, but where in the heck did it all go? That's my favorite person to work with because they're the ones that I can really help. But I can work with people of all income levels and all backgrounds and help them with coaching and helping them really set a foundation moving forward that's going to put them in a way better place. Everybody that's come through I have two programs, and everybody who's gone through either of them has said what a wonderful thing it was, and how much clarity and confidence they have now with their money, and how much they're understanding. And there was another couple last year that was that I worked with, and they didn't need to work with me anymore because they were on their own now. And it was great to be able to say, hey, you don't need me anymore. You guys are doing great. That's the rewarding thing is like you're fine. You know how to do your finances, and they'll ask me questions here and there when new things come up. But it's just nice to be able to say, I helped that couple get on the same page, and now they don't fight about money. I tease people that come on and say, look, if you're a married couple that's used to fighting about money, after working with me, you're going to have to figure out something else to fight about.
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you for being up on the show today with us today because I think you showed up with this wholeness that sometimes misses from the conversation around money. So I just want to thank you for that, for really telling the truth about where you started in your background and what the things that you've been through. That was a very, vulnerable place to come from sometimes. And
Hmm.
so for making this so practical though today that someone can actually begin with some of the tips that you talked about and also in partnership with whoever's in their household because
Hmm.
the relationships the conversations and the habits that are happening under our roofs right now, that is that home economy, guys, and that's where commerce begins. So that's why I was so excited to have Paris on the show with us today to share some of his heart and some of the things that he walks and, he walks and talks the language, just like so many of you guys really want to aspire to reach. So again, Paris, thank you for being on the show with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that wraps us up for another week here at Unlocking Commerce and Business. We have all kinds of exchange of value happening here on the show. Paris came and did that and showed up in a big, big way. And I hope that you all took something away from what you heard today. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening to Unlocking Commerce and Business. If this conversation resonated, here's what you can do. Subscribe for weekly conversations with survivors, innovators, and changemakers, building regenerative alternatives to extractive commerce. Share this episode with collaborators, partners, funders, and changemakers in your network. The people ready for restorative commerce need to hear these voices. Drop a comment below. Tell us what patterns you're recognizing or what solutions you're building. We read every one. Commerce is everywhere, and healing extraction patterns inside our communities creates regenerative commerce outside. Like a lighthouse, we're here, exploring and cutting through fog, pointing toward what works. Welcome to the era of restorative commerce. Until next time, explore courageously, build sovereignly. You are the source and store of value. This is Connie Davis signing off. Thank you for being here.